Florida. I'm very happy to have all of you here. And I'm very happy to have our guest this evening, Michael Nava. Hello, Michael. Say hello.
Hi, howdy everyone.
Nice to see you. Where are we finding you this evening?
So I live in California, just outside of San Francisco, where it is about 60 degrees and foggy.
Oh, well, isn't the summertime foggy there usually?
It is, it is. In fact, we call the month that's coming up, we call it August.
August. I love that. It was a clue in either yesterday's or this morning's New York Times crossword puzzle. And so I got it right at foggy, F-O-G-G-Y, for the weather in San Francisco in the summer. So it's good. Also, folks, I want you to say hello to my colleague, Paula Sierra. Paula, say hi.
Hello, everyone.
Nice to see you. You're behind all those beautiful arches there and all that great prism. And so thank you. So Paula will be behind the scenes as we do this, and she'll be providing us all the technical support here. And so thank you, Paula. So for those of you who've not joined us before, we're happy to have you here. This is a series that we do virtually every week. We started it during COVID. This might be episode number 58 or 59, if you go back and look. And it's really been a great way to actually bring artists, writers, queer thinkers from around the country and the world to the rest of the world through Stonewall National Museum and Archives. If you have friends who are interested, they will be able to see this if they're not here now on our website. We post all of them there. Give us maybe about 48 or 72 hours to post it on the website. The website is stonewall-museum.org, and you can see it there. And also you can see all the past talks there as well. It's been a great way to share different queer voices to a much larger audiences. It's been one of the few things that has been good about the pandemic, is the fact that we've been able to bring a lot of people for these events, and so we've been very happy about it. We also want to thank our friends at Our Fund, which is an LGBTQ community foundation located here in Fort Lauderdale. And they support the programming and they're helping us not only to pay stipends for the artists who are appearing, but also to allow us to translate it and in different languages, and also to provide closed captioning as well. So thank you very much to our friends at Our Fund. Also, hello to all of our friends on Facebook. We simulcast these there as well. I know a lot of people watch this on Facebook. Sometimes there might be 40, 50, 100 people who watch it there, and so that's great. Steve, it's nice to see you here as well. And so to see people sort of populating it. If you are in South Florida, please come by and visit us. We're located, of course, at 1300 East Sunrise. We've been in the same building for now probably 12 or 13 years. It is one of the largest LGBTQ libraries and archives in the world, if not the solar system, so I'm told. The library has 28,000 LGBTQ books. And I was just looking up, I'm going to ask Michael about this in a minute, but I was doing a search of our online card catalog, and Michael's name came up 29 times, which is really sort of great to see that we have all of these works of Michael in the library. In the archive, there are about 2,900 linear feet of archives, and that translates to about 6 million pages of queer history. I didn't understand what that meant, but somebody pointed out that's all the way up one side of the Empire State Building and all the way down the other. So that's a lot of gay stuff that we have there. So today, for example, there was somebody from Penn State doing research there. We have people, we have researchers and writers from all over the US coming there. And it's a wonderful resource that we have. And of course, if you're here, please stop by. We have 2 exhibitions up right now. One is called Don't Ask, Do Tell, which is talking about the relationship between the US military and the LGBTQ community, which for the exhibition, it really starts in George Washington's time. He had a lieutenant who was imprisoned for sodomy in 1788. And then it ends with Joe Biden actually allowing trans people to serve in the military. And so we trace the entire history of the relationship. And what's interesting is when you think about the idea that today there might be 65,000 open LGBTQ members of the US military, there was only this sliver of acceptance during the Obama years, and then what we have right now during Biden's time, and the rest of the time, there was always this very fraught relationship. And so we examined that, I think, quite well in this exhibition. We also have another exhibition up, which was curated by Megan Kent, who's the chief curator at the Hollywood Center for Arts and Culture, called Off Our Backs, and it's looking at early lesbian publications from 1956 to 2000. And what I love about that show is the fact where men might have objectified and fetishized themselves or each other, and become very sexual and looking at their bodies and looking at sex. What Megan really brings out is how a lot of the women's publications were really looking at political issues. So whether it was about developing community or sexual autonomy or politics, there's so much, it's so much deeper. And some of these things, as I say, go back to 56. So that would be probably 40, 60 years ago. And these issues are so relevant today. So both of those shows are great. If you don't get our newsletter, please sign up at stonewall-museum.org. And you can get our weekly newsletter. We don't ask for money a lot, maybe a little bit, but not so much, depending upon the time of year. And you can sign up there. We send one out every Tuesday. And of course, we're still accepting donations. We probably get donations 2 or 3 times a week. We accept books and we accept objects for the archives. And of course, it's very important for all of these materials to be preserved. So I think that's the end of my spiel here, and I'd like to go to Michael now. And so, Michael, we're finding you in California. I guess my first question for you is, how have you been surviving the pandemic? How's it been going for you?
Well, you know, my husband is a nurse who works at the VA here in San Francisco. So he's been going to work every day, though not dealing on the front lines with COVID, though of course it's affected the entire institution. But personally, we've been incredibly fortunate. You know, we love each other and we get along, so we've had each other for company, and we haven't suffered any of the sort of terrible financial consequences that many people suffered in the pandemic. So, you know, I have to say and we're both introverts, so spending time alone or only with each other has not been a hardship for us.
Yeah, that's great. How long have you guys been together?
19 years.
Congratulations.
We've been married for 11.
Yeah, congratulations. So, and of course, marriage did not ruin your relationship, right?
No, actually, you know, we never felt that we had to get married, but we did it. We got married when Proposition 8 was on the ballot, which overturned. So the California Supreme Court briefly said that same-sex marriage should be legal in California, and then the people passed a proposition saying, overturning that decision. Essentially, there was about a 6-month period in 2008 when we could get married under the Supreme Court's decision, and that's when we did it. Mostly more as a political statement than because we believed we needed to for our relationship.
So, Michael, from what I've been able to read, you grew up in California from primarily a Mexican-American family. You went to undergraduate school. What did you study in undergraduate school? Do I have you here?
Yep. Hear me?
Yep. Now I can. Yep.
Yes, I got my degree in my undergraduate degree in history from Colorado College.
Oh, that's right, Colorado College. And so, how long was the period between undergraduate school and going to law school?
I took 2 years off. 1 year I had a fellowship, and I was traveling abroad, and then I came back and just sort of sorted through my options and decided that law school was probably the best option I had at the time. So I got into Stanford, and I graduated from Stanford and practiced law for 35 years.
35 years. Yeah. And so can you sort of pin a time when you thought about being a writer?
So, my desire to write preceded my desire to be a lawyer. I started writing and thinking of myself as a writer when I was 12 years old, which was the same age when I came out to myself as gay. And, I had all of these feelings and words that I couldn't say to anyone. So I started writing them down. And that began the practice of writing that's lasted, all these years. When I was in college, although I majored in history, I studied writing, creative writing, but I was primarily a poet. And I didn't start writing fiction until I was in law school, when I started working on what would become the first novel in this series of crime fiction.
Yeah. So I took a little search on the Stonewall online catalog, and your name showed up 29 times. Your name shows up in 29 different books. How many books do you have?
Well, I myself have only written 11 works of fiction and then a work of nonfiction, but I contributed essays to a number of books,
Good.
Anthologies and so forth, and so I think that accounts for the other books. Yeah. And they're at this point, I'm in a couple of academic studies, so my name also pops up in academic works.
It's clear from the people who come to Stonewall that you have a great following. Your fiction has a great following, and you have a character who I think is in 10 of your books, Henry Rios. I want to talk about him a little bit. But how does it feel to have a following of your fiction, apart from the financial side? I'm sure that's all great, although I'm sure you're not making a bazillion dollars. You're not James Patterson, and you probably don't want to be, or Kitty Kelly stuff. But the thing is that you want to have some relationship with your readers. You know that there is a population out there that is reading your books. And when you move sort of all of the business, the publishing and the editors and the agents and everything else, what is it that you want what is it that you want your followers and readers to get out of your books?
So, there's a famous quote that's usually attributed to, oh my God, I'm blanking on the name of the Black African-American writer, Toni Morrison, who they asked her why she wrote the kinds of books she wrote. And she said, essentially, I write the kinds of books I wish that I'd been able to read when I was young. And I mean, that's really been my motivation too. I write about the experience of being a gay man and a Latino because we are a community still vastly underserved in sort of the cultural platforms of our society. In TV and movies and music. I mean, it's better now than when I started publishing 30 years ago, but still, it's still pretty tokenistic. And I wanted to create a body of literature that other, not just gay men, but I have a big following among lesbians too, but just queer readers could read and they could say, yeah, I identify with that character. I identify with aspects of his struggle. And he's telling a truth that applies to me as well as to himself. And that's really been my motivation for writing. And the rest of it, I'm not so concerned about. I made my living as a lawyer, not as a writer. And so the financial consideration was never part of it. And I did that. I became a lawyer and I took on this other career because I wanted to have the freedom to write what I wanted to write without having to worry about meeting the expectations of a publishing world, which is still overwhelmingly white and straight.
Yeah, absolutely right. And of course, in the last 10 years, the publishing world has just changed so much and so crazy. And I certainly remember a day in which if one were self-published, they weren't considered to be, to have the stature of somebody who had been published, gone through the system. And of course, it's a degree of white supremacy and patriarchy that system was all about. And I think it's a wonderful thing that people have been able to put their books out there in a different way. So in thinking about your books and thinking about Henry, sort of an obvious question about Henry. What percentage of Henry is you?
Well, I think when I started, I would say a lot of Henry was me, but we've been together for 10 books now, and we're less and less similar. So at this point, I don't know. I would say maybe 25%, but he's definitely become his own person.
Yeah. So, totally oddball question here. Do you ever dream about Henry as a character? Do you ever have a relationship with Henry in your dreams? Because he's been so much a part of your life for so many years. Do you bump into him in your dreams?
No, that's a really interesting question. I've never dreamed about Henry Rios, and
but yet he's been somebody who's been with you as much as a sibling or a family member, or he's been by your side for how many decades?
He's like a shadow, though. You sort of cease to notice it most of the time, yeah. And then now and then you think, oh yeah, there's that guy. There's my shadow, and of course I'm his shadow. I'm sure he feels the same way about me.
Yeah. Of course. All right. So when we think about the books and we think about the series, there is sort of the detective part, there's the gay part, there are other elements to it. What do you think you want your readers to get out of those books? There's a little bit of a sexy part to them as well, too. You kind of put, there's a Latino part in them. You drop stuff in probably 4 or 5 buckets there. Do you feel they're all equal? Are you pushing one? Because you get to control this stuff. And also, I'll say too, before you answer this, one book is obviously different than another. But as we look at the total body of work, you know it better than anybody else does. But so, what are those elements that have come forward in your mind? Is it gay? Is it detective? Is it sex? Is it talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, they are mysteries in the tradition of American noir. So there are certain conventions that I follow pretty faithfully, and one is, sort of the lone detective outsider character who is called upon to solve these problems, and who has to sort of sometimes descend into the demi-monde to find his answers. So I'm always conscious when I'm writing these books that my first responsibility is to draw the readers into the story so that they'll keep turning the pages. And the way that I do that is to try to construct plots that keep people guessing until the end about, who did it and why. So that's always present in the books. And then the rest of the stuff, I sort of slip in the stuff about gay identity and Latino identity. Rios is a recovering alcoholic, so there's some stuff about that. So that the character stuff is stuff I slip in as a way of, again, in some way, validating the experience of other queer people and maybe educating straight people, a little bit about what our lives are actually like as opposed to their stereotypes. And in different books, different things are important. There are some books in which his Latino identity is very important, and others where it's more in the background. Then the sex stuff, most mysteries don't have a lot of sex in them, a lot of graphic sex, because it's considered not part of the genre. But for a gay writer, I think it's really important, because part of being gay or queer is being sexually liberated, is being liberated to, is having your desire validated and liberated. And so I think, that's just part of our character. And it's also, I think, that who we have sex with, how we have sex, what we think about when we're having sex, what we want in sex, those are as important to the development of a character as, their education or where they live or how much money they make or what their race or ethnicity is. And so I never use sex gratuitously. I use it to move the narrative or to deepen the reader's understanding of a particular character. Sometimes it gets quite graphic.
Well, of course, but I think it's great, and also I love the idea of thinking about as you write certain things as the plot moves along and as the characters develop, you're thinking about how this particular action might be perceived by gay people or straight people or mystery readers or whatever subset that people go into. And so you get to try to mold people's exposure in different ways by being able to make that happen. Which then brings me to the next question. I remember having a conversation with quite a few years ago with the mystery writer Robert Parker, and I had a chance to work with him. And of course, he was not a gay man, lovely wife. Although Robert and Joan had 2 gay sons, and one of them is a great ballet dancer. But anyway, so I remember speaking to Bob, and so here's somebody who was just cranking out book after book after book, and so he was living in Cambridge, just outside of Harvard, and he did a talk at the Fine Arts Work Center, and so we were having dinner. I said, "So what's it like? What's it like pumping out these Spencer novels?" And he said, "Well, I put a sheet of paper in the typewriter. I sit down at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm done every day at 12. And then I have 2 martinis, and then I play tennis in the afternoon, and I take a nap, and I do whatever I want to after that." So for him, he swore that he just had his writing time, and he also swore, although I didn't fully believe him, but he swore that he did not map the story out. He did not map it out from beginning to end as to who the villain was going to be at the end and the twists and turns that are going to happen. But I'm now asking you to lift up the curtain a little bit about your books and tell us a little bit about your process and a little bit about how you construct the story. How much of the construction happens along the way as you write the words on the page, and how much of it is really premeditated on your part?
So when I began writing the first couple of books, because they were also the first 2 novels I'd ever written about anything, I actually outlined fairly heavily. I did chapter outlines because I was afraid that I would get lost if I didn't do that. But the better I got at it, the less I needed that kind of heavy-handed outlining. So, but unlike Parker, I do need to know the basic trajectory of the story before I start writing it. I need to know where it starts, where it ends, who gets killed, who killed them, who kills the victim, and why, what the perpetrator's motives are. And I have to have a general sense of time and setting.
Mm.
You know, and I write things down. I write basically small little synopses. And while I'm writing, I keep these little journals.
Oh,
and
thank you. Oh, just bring that up a little bit. Oh, it's so great to see your journals.
So I just, you know, as things occur to me as I'm going to sleep or as I wake up first thing about the book, because, you know, the actual sitting down and writing part is the tip of the iceberg, I think. Most of the book gets written in my head before I actually sit down to write it.
Mm.
And so even when I'm not sitting here and writing, at some level, I am constantly thinking of the story and the characters. And things come to me, and then I jot them down in these little notebooks, and then I don't write any longer than Parker did. You know, I write 3 hours max. The first draft, the revisions are longer.
Sure.
But the first draft, you know, I can only go for 3 hours. And a lot of times, you know, I have a general idea of how things go, but the specific scenes, sometimes I'm not sure what they are until I'm writing them.
Yeah.
But they come from deep within. I mean, they're not, you know, and that's actually that's what creativity is. It's preparing the ground for the voices to speak through you, at least as a writer. I don't know what it's like for other kinds of arts.
And you know, of course, you were trained as a lawyer and you practiced law for a long time. And so, you know, and I went to law school and practiced law for a long time as well, too. And so I think I approach everything as a lawyer and very analytically. But so my question, and you may not be able to answer it, it'd be like me answering, do I approach things like a lawyer structurally in that way, just as you defined? Of course, I think I approach everything that way. But the question is really about how much do you think your training in law school and then practicing law influence the way you actually construct your creative practice?
Well, I mean, I think what I got from the practice of law is discipline. I'm a very disciplined and organized person. And I think that practicing law only reinforced those characters, and that those are very helpful to writing fiction. You know, people say, oh my God, I could never write a 500-page book. So how do you do it? And I say, well, you sit down every day at the same time. You treat it like a job, basically, and you don't get up until you've done some writing.
You put that piece of paper in the typewriter and you spend those 3 hours and you bang it out. You know, of course, you know, I mean that metaphorically now, but of course that's how it works. That's how it works.
The other thing that law gave me, because I was an appellate lawyer, and I worked mostly for the California appellate court system, and I ended up working at the Supreme Court on death penalty cases, death penalty appeals. So I did a lot of criminal law, and so, of course, thinking deeply about the criminal law, and my character in the novels is a criminal defense attorney, there was a lot of overlap there. So my background as a lawyer was very helpful in creating a credible lawyer character and credible legal cases for him to be involved in.
So let's talk about your new book, Lies with Men. And so for those of you who are not aware, there's obviously a biblical reference with that title and in the book. So of course it raises the question for me to ask about your own religious upbringing. Was it Christian, Catholic?
So, you know, I'm a Mexican American, and I was raised in the Mexican American neighborhood in Sacramento here in California. So I was nominally Catholic, but we were poor, we were working class. So I didn't go to Catholic school. I didn't really have much exposure to the institutional church. What I had exposure to was kind of my Mexican grandmother's folk religion,
Oh,
you know.
talk
And
about that, talk about that a little bit.
well, I mean, it's basically a kind of folk Catholicism where you put pictures of Jesus and the saints around your house, and you pray, and but you don't really participate in the church. You don't go to mass every Sunday. You don't do communion. I mean, it was a household that was imbued with the notion of faith and God and Jesus, but in the best ways, of the teachings of humility and love and forbearance and all those Christian virtues that Christians seldom practice. But we didn't see a priest very often because the nearest church was a white church and they really didn't like Mexicans in it.
Oh, very interesting. So, do you think you had a first communion or a confirmation? Yes.
I have both had a first communion and confirmation. But my point is that I don't have the kind of I didn't have the kind of toxic relationship with the Catholic Church that so many LGBTQ people have because it wasn't in my face.
But what's interesting is that, I mean, I was raised a Roman Catholic, but, we did not study the Old Testament. And of course, the Old Testament does appear in this book. I think there's a quote from the Old Testament in the very beginning of this book, which I find for many gay Catholics, that their relationship to established religion is troubled in many ways. I mean, of course, there's been a lot of rejection. And of course, you bring up a point which I hadn't even thought about, is the idea that Mexican and brown people might not have been accepted by the local Catholic Church down the street. And that was a reality, even though Catholicism in your parents' and grandparents' times might have been culturally incredibly influential in their lives. Not what we might have thought about it, but whatever they gained from whatever they learned about Catholicism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, at Easter, my grandmother made a little altar on the dining room table with a picture of Jesus, and candles would burn, and we prayed every night. And so I mean, we had our own observances, but they were firmly rooted in the Catholic tradition. They just weren't what middle-class white Catholics might recognize as Catholicism. And you're right about it. The Catholics don't really push the Old Testament the way that certain Protestant sects do, which doesn't stop the Catholics from being incredibly homophobic and misogynistic, but still.
Yes. What I mean, as an aside, again, I mean, I've been actually not reading the Old Testament, but reading about the Old Testament simply because I want to know where those stories came from. I want to know the taxonomy. I want to know the history. I want to know how those stories were passed from person to person, how they ended up in this amazing book that has influenced so many lives in so many ways. And not that I believe in any way whatsoever. I'm just interested in it as a historical artifact. I'm really interested in anything having to do with religion because it helps explain what happens to gay people and helps explain about culture in so many ways. And going back to that for a second, I mean, certainly with gay people, again, my 2 cents is that religion has probably done more to ostracize gay people than any other institution known to humankind.
I would say that's true of the monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, that we're familiar with. What preceded them in what the so-called pagan world was a much more tolerant attitude toward homosexuality, in the ancient world. And there were their gods in the pantheons of the Greeks and Romans or the Egyptians. They didn't condemn us the way that the monotheistic God does. And I think actually one reason that Judaism and Christianity condemn homosexuality is because they needed to distinguish themselves from the so-called pagan religions.
Yes, and I agree with that 100%. And also when you think about the religions that were indigenous to both South America and North America, that were here before colonialism came and Western civilization came, and they were so much more open than sort of the very black and white, male, female, sort of these buckets that people had to be put into. But I think that's a topic for another day, because it's so fascinating and there's so much to be said about that.
But just as a quick aside, so I'm reading a book about the Aztecs.
Yep.
And it's a new book, and I forget the title. It came out within the last 2 years. And the writer, a woman, she talks about the fact that there were homosexual relationships in Aztec society, but that when the Christians came, they suppressed any record of that.
Of course. And the thing is that, and again, I've spoken about this before, but the idea that I'm not convinced that the divide between homosexuals and heterosexuals is valuable to any of us. I don't know that it really advances our cause for those who might be totally akin to heteronormative behavior and those that are not totally imbued with heteronormative behavior, whatever that means. And today we talk about gender binary, and we talk about queerness, and we talk about all these other words, but those are all just words of the moment, but really sort of the core essence of all this is the idea that there's this path about heteronormative behavior, and then there's everything else, and it doesn't need those labels. And even those within the heteronormative community, I would say, there's a lot of variations going on there as well too. And so, and I don't know that it serves us. We're not, you and I in our lifetimes are not going to undo all this stuff, but certainly we have the opportunity to talk about it.
Well, I back in 1994, I wrote a book, a nonfiction book about gay rights as it was then known. And my co-author and historian and I, we talked about the invention of the homosexual, which is basically, it's a Victorian invention. The Victorians were big on taxonomy, and they kind of create this binary, heterosexual, homosexual, because they need a norm. In order to have a normal, you have to have an abnormal. So we were the abnormal against which they could measure normality. But you're right, they have absolutely no value. And I'm really, one of the things I find most exciting about younger generations is this idea of gender fluidity and gender flux, and that sexual orientation is not necessarily a fixed thing. I mean, it is for me, because I only like boys, but I recognize that I'm an outlier.
Yes, but again, you can appreciate the fact that you have brothers and sisters who have the same ideas and persuasions, in being non-heteronormative, that can do it. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, I love the fact that we talk about non-conforming individuals and gender and non-gender but binary stuff, and talking about the queer world out there, and the sense that it's just bringing stuff to a level that you and I, when we were young gay men in the 1970s, we never would have been thinking about all that kind of stuff. And I don't know about you, but in the 1970s, I was wrapped up in an idea that there was a demand, even though I was gay, a demand for hyper masculinity. There was a demand to be male, and that was the only way to counteract the fact that we were not heteronormative inside.
Yeah, that was the era. I mean, honestly, in the 70s, until I got to Stanford, which was quite near San Francisco, I lived in Colorado Springs, I lived in Buenos Aires, and I lived in Sacramento, which were not hotbeds of gay activism. And mostly, frankly, I was more concerned about what I was going to do with my life professionally than what my sexual orientation. I mean, I was gay, I was out, but I didn't think much about my identity. It wasn't until I got to Stanford and I was around a lot of other gay men for the first time that I began to think. And even then, I found the whole clone thing kind of, I grew up with machismo, and I found that kind of repellent, actually.
Did you? Interesting. Yeah. So going back to the book, of course, we've talked, Lies with Men, of course, is a quote from the Old Testament. And
Leviticus.
yes, and then there's also a major part of this book which deals with HIV and AIDS, and of course how that has affected the gay community. Talk to us a little bit. You have a story, of course, given your age. You have a story about a relationship with HIV and AIDS. Can you put your finger on the first time that you heard of this mysterious disease that affected somebody around you?
Well, I remember conversations about HIV/AIDS in the early 80s, when I would have been in my mid-20s. And I was at that point practicing law in Los Angeles, and part of this whole young gay and lesbian lawyers group. And what I remember is how we guppies, as we called it,
yes, guppies, yep,
gay urban professionals, we thought, well, this is kind of something that affects lower class gay men who are kind of sleazy and hang out in bars and bathhouses, and we're all coupled, and we go to have nice dinner parties, and it's alarming, but we don't really think it's going to affect us. And I regret to say that was the attitude for a little while. And then what happened to me is I got sober in 1988 and started going to a 12-step program, which was filled with men who were HIV positive, well over 50%. And it really, it upset all of those assumptions I'd been making.
Yeah, and of course in 88, there were no protease inhibitors, there was no Truvada, there was none of the stuff, there was no PrEP, of course, there was nothing. Maybe in 88, there was some AZT, but of course that would have been toxic for some people at the time as well. My experience is somewhat similar. Although I do remember this very specific episode. I was probably, you and I are roughly the same age, about a year apart. But I remember having a boyfriend, and his boyfriend came over to meet us for brunch on a Saturday morning, and it was like 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and this was probably sometime in 80. We were in Boston at the time, and he said, so-and-so died this weekend, and they say it's some disease that has something to do with being gay. And I remember, so I was a young lawyer at the time, and remember just dismissing it. Like, this was not a real thing. This was, just like you said, this was something that happened to somebody else. This was something that happened to people who went to bathhouses. Although, I don't know about you, but of course, on the sly, I went to bathhouses at the time. I went to bars. I did all the stuff that young gay men did at the time, but yet I was a lawyer as well too. And so there was a certain amount of respectability that one had at the time. And so even if we were open gay men, or we could have been married at the time. We could have been, it could have been whatever it was. We were fooling ourselves to some degree. But I remember I have such a strong memory of thinking like something happened. And my first response was, it can't be real. There cannot be a disease associated with having sex with another man.
I remember having a conversation with my friend Luis Gutierrez, who was a fellow lawyer. And he said, this is bullshit. This is just a plot by straight people to keep us from having sex. There's no way it's sexually transmittable. He died 5 years later.
Yeah. And then, of course, there were everything about, it was poppers to attract lighting, to, gray wall-to-wall carpeting, to having after dark on your coffee table, to whatever the cliches were. Anyway, I'm sorry, but, I bring all this up because, of course, AIDS is part of this book. And so I don't know the answer to this. I probably should. How much of your past books dealt with AIDS?
Well, a lot of them, because what happened is, so the first 8 Rios books were published between 1986 and 2000. Then I took a 15-year break because I had other things that were interesting to me to do as a lawyer. So that was the era of AIDS. So it was really, if you were a gay male writer between 1988 and 2000, HIV/AIDS was an unavoidable topic.
Yeah.
So basically, all the books from the second book on involve Henry's lover is HIV positive, and spoiler alert, dies. In the course of the series, because that's what people did back then. They died. So yeah, AIDS was very much a part of the novels. And when I came back to the books a couple of years ago, I decided I needed to go back and fill in some chronological gaps. So although I've written 2 new books in the last 2 years, they actually are set back in the 80s. And so they also involve AIDS. And Lies with Men is about a ballot initiative in California that was proposed in 1986 that would have allowed health officials to quarantine people with HIV into camps. And it was on the ballot. It was on the California ballot that year.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, it's very real. And of course, on this very day, as we think about the government, as we think about a pandemic affecting 2 Americas right now, there are the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, and how we're going to go through this next 6 months or a year. It's just, the comparisons are just so stunning to think about how this is going to play out, and in comparison to how it played out during the Reagan years in the 1980s into the 90s.
Well, here we are in 2021, 40 years after the first AIDS cases were detected. There's still no vaccine.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We have PrEP, of course, and we have certain things, but you're absolutely right. And of course, in our lifetimes, I doubt we will ever see that vaccine that will protect you. But anyway, I'm going to stop all this because it's actually so fascinating. And so I don't know what you've chosen to read, but tell us a little bit of how this book came about. Tell us the process. Tell us, well, first of all, how long did you take to write it?
It took me about, all of the Rios books, they take about a year from start to finish. And I usually go 3 or 4 drafts in that time.
Okay. And was there a particular idea that had been germinating with you for a while, or was this something that you kind of moved along quickly?
Well, it's interesting because I started writing this book the day after the 2016 election. The day after the 2016 election.
Yeah.
And I had always had, so Lies with Men is set in California in 1986. And Rios, who was a lawyer in LA at that point, so there's a ballot proposition that would allow health officials to quarantine people with HIV. So of course the LGBTQ community, which was then really known as the gay and lesbian community, are up in arms about it, and they're organizing to defeat the proposition. And one of the groups that organizes is this group of young gay activists who call themselves queer. And they're basically based on ACT UP and Queer Nation. So they are going to get involved in acts of civil disobedience, and they ask Rios to be their lawyer so that when they're arrested, he can bail them out. And when they have to appear in court, he'll represent them when they're arrested for their acts of civil disobedience, which is how he gets involved with them. A big evangelical church is blown up, and the pastor happens to be there, and he's killed. And so one of the young activists in queer is linked to the bombing, arrested and charged with his murder, and is facing the death penalty because it's a capital crime. And so, Rios is defending this young man, and that's really sort of the murder mystery part of it, like who killed this man, why, and it's quite an elaborate plot. But I wanted to write a novel to remind people living in today that there have been other times in our very recent history when things seemed really desperate, when it seemed that the government had written us off, not only had written us off, but was actively hostile to us, that we felt embattled and alone, and we had only ourselves to rely on. And I wanted to remind them is that what we did was that we organized and we fought back. And that's why we are today. That's why we are where we are today.
And yes, and I think that people do need to understand, remember that, the work of ACT UP and Queer Nation, changed how the FDA works and operates today. It changed so many protocols in hospitals and so many things that happened. And that story has been written some, but I don't actually think it's out there. If you go to any hospital, COVID aside, there's so many things that happen today in a humanitarian way that are actually a result of the work of what ACT UP and other activists did at that time. And we could make a list of those things. And it's, because we're running out of time, you and I have had a great time chatting about all this stuff. But I do want you to read a section or two from the book, because I want the people to hear it in your voice. So if you've got something, I think you've set it up. So.
Yeah, I have a little bit of, so in this novel, among other things, Rios becomes involved with a younger man named Josh, and they start dating. Josh is kind of attached to this young gay activist group called Queer. Anyway, in this brief scene, they're on a date, and they have a conversation which a lot of us had in the 80s with people we were romantically involved with. So here they are. They're in Griffith Park in Los Angeles. I pulled into a parking space. We unloaded our picnic supplies and headed into the park. This side was less crowded. We found a stretch of lawn between two massive oak trees, laid out the blanket, food, and drink, and settled in. We stripped off our shirts and lay on our bellies facing each other, the sun warming our skin. "You're almost as dark as I am," I said. "That's the nice thing about working nights," Josh replied. "I can go to the beach during the day and work on my tan. Plus my family's Sephardic, so we start out a little darker. Our ancestors probably both came from Spain before your Queen Isabella ran us off." "Not my queen," I said. "She's the one who started the Spanish invasions that ended up wiping out most of my other ancestors in Mexico." "History is just one long bloodbath, isn't it, Henry?" I breathed in the warm air the scent of skin. Well, there's the official history, the one that gets written down, which is mostly a history of cruelty and destruction. And then there's the unwritten history, the secret history of kindness. He smiled. If it's not written down, how do you know about it? By inference. If humans were only cruel and destructive, we would have gone out of business a long time ago. Therefore, the reason we've survived is because the cruelty has been tempered with kindness. It's not as dramatic, and the people involved aren't usually the ones in charge, so no one bothers to record it. Human history is basically a contest between our better instincts and our worst ones. Which one will win? He asked. I don't know, I replied. All I know is you've got to choose a side. You chose kindness. I touched his face with my fingertips. So did you. He scoffed. What am I doing that makes the world a better place? It's not what you do, it's who you are. You're a good person, Josh, I said, my hand dropping to his chest, the beat of his heart beneath my fingers. A kind person. He said quietly, that's not true. I'm not even an honest person. What are you talking about? He rolled over on his belly, buried his face in his arms, and murmured in a voice so low I almost couldn't hear him. I lied when I told you I didn't get tested. He raised his head, looked at me, and said, I did. I'm HIV positive. I couldn't tell you. I was afraid you'd. His voice trailed off. The words should have surprised me, but I'd always suspected the truth about his status. If he really hadn't been tested, it was because he was pretty sure the test would come back positive. And if he had, and wasn't telling me because he was positive, I believed he was too honest to conceal it indefinitely. I threaded my fingers through his sun-warmed hair and said, I already told you it doesn't make any difference in how I feel about you. Abruptly, he pulled himself up into a seated position. I don't believe you. I told you I would never lie to you, and I'm not lying now. He shook his head. You just feel sorry for me. Oh my God, Josh, I said impatiently. Pity is the last thing in the world I feel for you. I reached out, pressed my hand over his heart, and said, I love you. In a small voice, he asked, do you? Yes, I said. He took an audible breath, exhaled, and said, I love you too. I got to my feet and pulled him up. Come on then, I said. Where are we going? Back to my place. We kissed. His skin felt like summer. His mouth tasted like life.
Oh, so, I mean, for me, that's so powerful because it actually, of course, those things happen today when two gay men, when two people can be sharing those intimate feelings and about somebody being positive. But I have to say that so accurately reflects what it was like at that time. It was the mashup of love and vulnerability, and that love would actually it would defeat whatever there was going on out there. And it's so powerful, Michael.
By the way, I'm negative. My partner is HIV positive.
Yeah. So you come to this from a very real place, and of course it's, for so many people today, it's in our generation who've been lucky to survive. Those kind of distinctions don't actually make a lot of difference anymore. And so it's great. Well, I have to say this has been an absolutely lovely conversation. It's great to sort of reminisce to some degree about lawyering and about being young gay men, but also talking about what's happening today. I hope if your travels bring you to South Florida, you come visit us at the Stonewall Library and Archive. I would love to show you around and show you the 29 entries that I'm seeing here in our in our catalog about your books. And also, I'm sure that people would love to see it reading by you in person as well too. We are beginning to do readings and events in person. So unfortunately, we don't have a budget to bring people there. But if you have some reason to be here, we would love to have you here. And also, I'd love for you to poke around in the archive and see what it is that you can find. It sounds like you're at a point in your career where you can actually spend some time working on this stuff. I suspect you have a few more books in you.
Oh yeah, I'm working on one now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was great to meet you. Thank you so much for this time. And thank you for all of your candor and your honesty tonight.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Yeah, it has been. Thank you. And everyone, thank you all for joining us. Paula, who's there behind the scenes, I want to say hi to you. Paula, thank you. It was great. Thank you, Paula, for making this all happen. And thank you for everybody for being here. And we will have another program next week or the week after. And again, go to stonewall-museum.org to find out everything that's going on, and be sure to sign up for the weekly newsletter, because that will give you everything that's happening. So good night, everybody. Michael, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.